Welcome to today's episode of Talent Strategy 60. I am your friendly neighborhood talent strategy nerd, Dr. Jim. And with me today, and today's topic is normalizing mental health conversations in the workplace. And joining us today, we have, I want to introduce our guests and start off the show. So first up, Cliff, welcome to the show, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Dr. Jim. I'm Cliff Yurkevich. I head up strategy for Phenom, which is a talent experience marketing and management company. We're best known for bringing hyper-personalized experiences into the recruiting process. So we're a technology company, and we've innovated this space over a number of years to really help better connect candidates and recruiters. And create this new world of experience that has become so important. On a personal level, I have another passion that's very important to me, which is a foundation, and we'll talk about a little bit today, that my wife and I founded, serving the mental health community. I had a son that suffered from bipolar disorder and drug addiction, and passed away at the age of 26 a couple of years ago. As sort of at the height of COVID, and again, relevant to this conversation and what we're going to talk about. And so serving the mental health community, and I'm also a recovering alcoholic. So I know full well some of the mental health challenges that this community is trying to solve, and looking for connections to other human beings to help do that. And so that has become my purpose out of Phenom, which is to help 1 billion people find the right job. So happy to be here and be a part of the conversation.
Super pumped about having you on the show, Cliff. And I want to follow up with something that you just mentioned, and that was some of the backstory of what happened throughout your life. And I appreciate you sharing that in such an open forum. It actually hints at some of the big reasons why we're actually doing this episode. But what I'm curious about is, how did you create the space or the courage to be able to speak about that openly in your workplace? Because that's not really typical.
No, it's not. And that's what we're trying to change, is to normalize this conversation so that individuals that are either acutely or chronically suffering mental health issues or has a mental health crisis can feel open about discussing it with their employer, to get support, or to ask for support outside of the workplace, but that may also affect things like performance and other things. Just to have that level of understanding in the workplace, that by the way, this is really normal. We all suffer some level of mental health issue. We're made up of two parts, the mental and the physical. And the physical is easy, to identify. The mental part for some folks isn't, and some of those are the same thing. Somebody might be suffering from a physical ailment that's causing a mental health issue, and so we really need to treat both of those. But for me, when I came out of, I've been in recovery now for 8 years, a little over 8 years. And when I started working at Phenom about 6.5 years ago, it was one of the very first things that I was open with my employer about. And now this won't work for everyone. At least, people may not feel that it would work for them, and that's okay. This is just my experience, right? I felt like in order for me to continue on my journey of recovery and self-discovery, one of the things that I've learned about myself is my alcoholism was really brought on by my lack of sharing, my lack of connection with those around me. And I used to hide a lot of things. And the alcohol was a sort of a symptom of a much larger problem that had been struggling with my whole life. So I decided to be open because I felt like I had nothing else to lose at this point. And let me be open about it. I'm not running around the office with a flag waving that, hey, I'm an alcoholic, applaud for me. It's not about that, but it is about being open with, what I am committed to in my own recovery and my own mental health is that has to come first. So I let my employer know that. And they were very, very open about it, to the point now where, we're one of the groups that I started, this sober living group at Phenom, is one of the larger ERGs. It's got a lot of participation from folks that suffer similar to myself, folks that are curious, what we call sober curious, and also it spawned off another mental health ERG that we have in the organization. So we've sort of drafted the entire company into this mental health awareness, and we've created programs to be able to do that. And it just comes from, someone standing up and saying, I'm tired of living this way, and I'm just going to be who I am. And frankly, if I'm being brutally honest, I'm beyond the point of anyone caring about what they think about me. And those that attempt to understand who I am will have that conversation, which is more people than most. In fact, all of my colleagues at work are curious about how I do what I do. And others are following in that path, which is really great. But the whole idea is, it's leaders have to stand up. And I feel as a leader of the company, I was employee 21 at Phenom. We're now about 1,800 people. So I just felt very comfortable with being able to share that, come what may,
Yep.
because I had tried the old way, and guess what happened? I drank.
Yeah.
It didn't work, right? So I tried something new, and the response has been overwhelmingly positive.
And
That's sort of how it came about.
no, I really appreciate you sharing that, Cliff. And I think you're hitting at a number of things that's relevant to sort of modern leadership philosophy. You have to have courage, you have to have authenticity, you have to be vulnerable, and those are things that we're going to talk about throughout the conversation. So I also want to introduce our other feature panelist, Damar, to the show. Damar, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us. You are a cascading leadership veteran, so nice to see you again. Tell the audience a little bit more about your background, your story, and what got you motivated in participating on this panel.
Absolutely, and thanks, Dr. Jim and Cliff. What an amazing story and journey that you're on with you and your wife, and all that you guys have gone through. So my name is Damar Phillips. I'm the Vice President of People Operations at Hyliion. Hyliion is a green energy technology company that is putting electrification of batteries or powertrains within commercial fleets. And so that's our mission. We are a young company, but exciting. So please be on the lookout for future things to come on behalf of that organization. As I dive into my experience over the last 20 years, I've had the privilege of working at some of the largest companies in the world and some of the smaller companies as well. And what I've seen with the privilege that I've been given to lead people functions throughout that time is that mental health has been an albatross for people in the past. I think the onset of COVID-19 has kind of put everybody stopped in their tracks for a period of time to allow us to reflect what is it that we can do to help support each other. And Cliff, you talked about connection and connectivity several times in your intro. And that's absolutely right. What COVID did was stopped us from being able to do the thing that makes us uniquely who we are, which is connect. You have the happy hours for a reason at the office or at workplaces. Well, with COVID, you couldn't socialize. It put into practice some of the things that remote work, the separation of cultures, which I'll talk about a little bit later, the us versus them, the people who could work remotely were taken out of the office and left only those that could only be in the office, right? And so how did we prioritize your safety and your security within the business context to keep, finances for everyone to have a job instead of mass layoffs and those types of things? And so it kind of put the pressure on us as leaders to try to figure this us versus them out. But I think as a organization, I'm so excited to be at Hyliion because we are looking at things differently. We are looking at some policy things, which we can talk about a little bit later, to help make sure that people know that they have advocates, that they have someone to listen, that the organization is trying to create policies that allow them to not be shame or shameful of having an issue, but someone that can be there to support them to get through those issues. And employee assistance programs, for example, is a way to do that. But also just the flexibility around PTO. Don't want to get into much of that. I know we're going to cover that here in a little bit. But thank you for the honor and the privilege to talk about this topic, because it is critically important to all of us to be able to be there to lend a hand to our brother and sister in need.
That's great background, Damar, and I appreciate you sharing your insights and story. And we already have some phenomenal comments that are in the chat on the stream. We have Chelsea Eaton, who made a great comment, and Nick Adams also, who made a great comment. And I think I want to tie those into a follow up to you, since I've anointed you the speaker, the spokesperson for all of HR in the U.S. and abroad. So you're going to have to speak in that voice, and sorry, not sorry. But one of the things that is interesting about these sort of conversations is, and Nick pointed it out in the chat, is that this is an important conversation, but oftentimes organizations, want to help, but they're horrible at presenting solutions in a way that is supportive and constructive. And oftentimes employees feel like they're going to be punished for saying stuff like this out loud. From your perspective as an HR leader, how have you handled those sort of challenges? And I want to get your quick perspective on that, and then we'll dive into the broader conversation.
Yeah, I think, great. I think you summed it up: courage, authenticity, vulnerability. I think people want to have someone that they trust. And so, as the leader of the people function, I don't try to be Mr. Perfect all the time. I let people know that I do have emotions, and I'm not always going to be poised when things don't go a certain way. I am vulnerable, but I'm just like they are. I'm no better or no worse just because I lead the organization's people area. I take my shoes off one shoe at a time, like most of us, right? And I think if you are able to relate, being relatable, that is the biggest opportunity that HR departments or people functions have, is the ability to relate to their employees and not be just pro company all the time. There's an understanding that you have to put up a fight at times to get things done. You have to be an advocate for change, which I have branded with a badge of honor, and then go into the battle knowing exactly that you might not get the full outcome that you want, but step change is just as good as the big, huge incremental change. So we need to be standing up on behalf of our employee base, know when to say when, but lead from the front. And I've never been shy from doing that. And I would encourage all future HR leaders, or those that are watching right now, to figure out how to identify the voice of the employees and take that to the leadership team that can make some policy changes that can stick.
So Cliff and Damar, and I want to wrap this into something that Damar just mentioned, which is leaders need to lead from the front. And I appreciate both of you as leaders within your respective organizations actually being so out front about this particular topic and advancing the conversation. And that actually sets the stage and ties into the mission of these conversations that we've been doing on a weekly basis. The mission of our show is to empower talent leaders of all stripes and talent practitioners of all stripes to do more with less by leveraging the power of collective intelligence. And you two are advancing that cause. So I appreciate that. But let's set the stage a little bit and kind of map out the solutioning aspect of it. And both of you have actually already hinted at some of the things that are going on in the world of work and in the world in general that impacts this discussion. What we're trying to do is normalize mental health conversations in the workplace, and really the situation that most employees are in right now. You have an uncertain economic landscape. You have almost a crisis level increase of mental health issues amongst various employee cohorts. So whether you're talking about millennials, Gen X, Gen Z, all of those indicators are on the rise. You have global and local issues that are coming in. And I think both of you referenced the isolation that has come up with through the COVID transition. So what's lost, and Rob Savet, who is in the chat, he just mentioned, hey, work from home is great, but it isolates you from the broader community that you had when you were in office and working that route. So when you take in all of those external stimuli, it's not surprising that all of these issues associated with mental health are coming up. So my question to both of you, and we'll lead off with Damar first. When you look at the situation on the ground, what are the things that leaders need to understand to have more constructive conversations and get and be more supportive of their people and those mental health needs that employees inevitably will have given the circumstances on the ground?
That's an excellent question, Dr. Jim. I think it starts with a heart of empathy and a spirit of service, right? It's one thing to have high performers that try to bend over backwards to deliver results for the organization. It's another thing to have burnout and to have mass resignations that occur, because we saw the great resignation rate, and the job market is still extremely hot for employees to get other jobs. And so assessing as a team, as a department, as an organization, why are people leaving? What is it about our work environment that is causing those high performers to decide that they want to let it go, right? Um, we have to respect each other as people, and not, I'm your boss, so do what I say. But if you are in my shoes, how would I want to be treated? And I think with a spirit of empathy, with a heart of service, I think if those supervisors, managers would just take a step back and try to assess the situation holistically, I think that will lead to a better outcome overall. And then a tool that's available to everyone is engagement surveys. They can be anonymous feedback. You can have them targeted, but exercise more pulse surveys. Get a feel for what's happening within your organization. I know at Halion, we're going through that and going through the action item process now to make sure that we're listening. But it starts from there.
Awesome insights, Damar. And the reason why I was smiling is, Cliff and I are going back and forth, and there's a mental block in my mind that happens when I'm addressing him that came up. So with that being said, I really like what you said about the heart of empathy. And it's fundamental in a lot of leadership philosophy when you're talking about seek to understand before trying to be understood. That is like a core principle of leadership. And I love that you brought that out in terms of addressing the situation on the ground and trying to meet your people where they're at. Cliff, I want I want your take on also how leaders can better connect with their people in dealing with the circumstances that they're facing right.
Yeah, I love that Damar started with where I would start, which is empathy. And it's such an important attribute. It's a muscle that should be exercised.
Right.
And like any other muscle, it requires training. And we created a program. This is out, in my sort of private life, a program called Being Music. And my background is as a musician, and I've worked with a number of musicians over the years. And this one musician that I work with, he actually created this program called Being Music that I was a part of, helping produce. And it really uses music as a forum for teaching how to build what we call unconscious empathy. Through the lens of music. And so this is a muscle that needs a lot of exercise, because we all have sort of an unconscious bias, and how you counter an unconscious bias is through unconscious empathy. So my advice to leaders is, it is not enough, and we'll talk about this, I think, a lot in this session today. It's not enough to just fund and put resources towards building a program or even having it run. You as a leader should be in constant training about how to build an empathetic ear, how to build understanding of your audience, which is your people that work with you every day, the people that you are, for lack of a better term, that you're in charge of, right? So which means in part you have control over some of what happens in their well-being. And so this requires leaders to really educate themselves deeply on what it means to build empathy and that understanding. Don't delegate it to somebody else, right? You need to be able to do this. You need to participate in it, and you will be better for it. I know the leaders at my company at Phenom, Hari Reddy, Mahi Reddy, our COO, CEO, Brad Goldor, who is our chief people officer. They all practice like mindfulness, mental health exercises themselves. Like they're very conscious about building that empathetic muscle. To me, I'm so on point with Tamar on this. Like that is the one thing that I see that leaders don't do enough of. They're really good at throwing budget at something, throw a process, throw a program at it, but they themselves need to be better at building that empathy muscle.
Well, Cliff, and I think what you're saying is that people need to role model the expectations that you have throughout the organization. It's one thing for a lower level manager to embrace the feedback that is provided and move forward. It's another for the CEO to be the face of some of these things. So you're absolutely right. The C-suite has to also be involved and engage with this, because that gives people the license to be okay with it. And so great comments.
Yeah, I echo what Damar said, and there's one thing that almost almost immediately after you had mentioned the practice of unconscious empathy and the concept of it's a muscle that you need to build, we had a couple of great comments come in the stream where Tom Tate is talking about, as a husband and dad, I do things that try to connect with my team and take their whole person into account when I'm engaging with them from an empathy perspective. And then Tashana Jones, she commented in the chat that this is like many other things, something that leaders should be trained on, not just the empathy part of it, but also how to navigate mental health conversations in a constructive way. So what you both are saying, and we haven't even gotten into the meat of the discussion, is really resonating, and we're getting some great feedback from the stream. So I appreciate everybody chiming in and sharing their response and feedback. So let's drive this forward. And, we know what the landscape is, but I want to tackle the question of how the current conversation about mental health probably isn't very productive. So, Cliff, why don't you share with how some of those conversations around mental health, how they're structurally not effective or misaligned with the objective of helping employees move forward and heal whatever issues they're dealing with. Tell us a little bit about what you've.
Yeah, I think, from what I mean, in my own experience and what I've observed, through others, again, both in my workplace and then in my private life where I'm inside of other workplaces talking to folks about mental health and recovery. I think the first thing I would say is I'm thankful and grateful that we're able to have this conversation. Because even 5 years ago, it was a little bit embryonic in a sense, right? Like it was, you talk about it, you hear some things here and there. Now I believe it is fairly front and center. And I do think it's one of the benefits, there aren't many, that have come out of the pandemic, is that the awareness of this. But with the awareness has come, I think, a reaction. And so I think a lot of organizations, and they are well intended. There's a lot of positivity coming out of this. This isn't meant to be negative at all, but it is very reactionary to say, okay, what can we do to solve this right now? Like we need a program, or we need to, again, assign some budget, or we need some volunteers to help us with this. I think there is a process. We need to slow this down a little bit, slow down to speed up in a way. And not be so reactionary. It's good that we're reactionary to say, okay, I actually recognize now that this is a very serious problem, and it's a growing problem, and it's not going to get any better if we don't start to address it in a meaningful way. That's awesome. And I commend a lot of the business community for recognizing that and raising that awareness. But now we need to slow down and say, what does it actually take to build a meaningful community? This isn't about throwing budget or a program at it. This is about how do you build a community for your employee base. As a leader, what do you need to know? And to Dimar's point, and to the point that the chat bot or the chat in the chat room that they were saying, is to train leaders on what it actually takes to build the community. The community will help you dictate what those next things are, right? What programs, how to create different support systems, and yes, how to connect the external community and bring them into your work organization, because we all leave work, whether we're leaving our desk at home or leaving the office and coming home. We don't live two lives, right? We live one life, and work and home are part of it. And a lot of that stuff is bled over in really positive ways. And this is another way, again, building a community externally and internally in the organization, I think is really important. But it really is honestly just, we're very reactionary right now. The strong positive desire to help people, but not really knowing what to do.
So, I think there's a couple of areas that I want Damar to potentially tackle. I mean, Damar, you can tackle where we started the conversation, which is, how are the current conversations not exactly conducive to moving forward and healing from a mental health perspective. But Cliff actually brings out a great couple of points in his conversation. So you can respond to anything that Cliff said or the original question, because I think there's a lot of ground there.
Yeah, so I think, first, you're not alone, right? I think that's the first thing. You're not invisible. We hear you, we see you, and we are with you. I think those messages, you don't have to have a leader title to be an employee who sees that someone is struggling. And I think, fear has been the big reasons why people don't engage when they see someone who is struggling. You hear the concepts of, well, workplace violence, and the first thing they go to is mental health. You see a school shooting, you hear something that happened, and it automatically goes to mental health. It could just be a bad person doing a bad deed, right? And so mental health gets trivialized, and it's the first thing that people want to throw in the headlines. But what they want to do about it? Nothing. They want to brush it under the rug. We have to stop that. We have to acknowledge that there are functioning people every single day in business, in the highest levels of government, in the pulpit, wherever they're at, who have mental health issues. Some of them are using medications to treat it, and so the situations can be somewhat, controlled. But some people aren't aware that they have a mental health condition. And we can't make it to be us versus them. We have to make the conditions within the office to be available for people to say, I think I have a problem. I need to talk to someone about that. And I don't want it to show up on an evaluation later because I didn't complete an assignment. If I need time off work, I don't want my PTO to run out because I needed to take a few weeks off to get my mental acuity back. Or to check myself into a rehab facility if I'm struggling with substance. We have to start making the conditions more open so that people can choose to seek out the help, or even ask the people who they think should have help. Like the human resources would be a great department to go talk to. We have associate or employee assistance programs where they're free. But how many people know about that? Or how many people understand that it's a confidential service, that you can talk about any issue that you're going through and it's not going to be reported back through, the channels. I mean, we have to communicate more about this topic and not be fearful of what it means if we are to put on a program, an employee program that brings in a doctor or someone to be able to speak on some of these things. And then we need to also be better at identifying the symptoms and the things that could help people lead down to those types of paths. I mean, observation, being observant, I think comes to mind. Um, Let me briefly just talk about something that happened at the height of COVID while I was the HR leader at a manufacturing company. We lost an employee, and I struggled. I got the message Thursday evening. I called a mandatory 6 o'clock morning meeting so that I could deliver the message about his passing. But for 27 days, he lingered in ICU before he passed. And it was on everyone's mind. We were sending him text messages. We were trying to do video messages for him before he left this world. And I broke. How do you deliver that to 250 people that your colleague is no longer here from an illness that we didn't know if there were going to be a vaccine, what time it was, etc. But I stood flat-footed and I showed them that I cared, right? And I think as leaders, we have to at times embrace the suck, embrace the vulnerability that comes with this type of pressure. We had gone several months without major illnesses being contracted, and then when he did after Labor Day, it 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 was a kick in the gut. And so sometimes you have to stand flat-footed, let people see that you are human, right? And that you're not a robot, that you have feelings as well. And then together they can help support you. And what came out of that was one of the most beautiful things that I've ever received in my career from the employee base who decided, you've been taking care of us. I still get emotional thinking about it. You were taking care of us. Let us now take care of you. And so for one solid week, they were lunches and balloons and thank you notes and messages. I'll never have that feeling again. I don't want that feeling again because it came out outside of a tragedy. But the human spirit is remarkable uh, if you show that you care. And I think that's what we need more in business. It doesn't need to be the cold boardroom, that analogy. We need to be more human and put human back in human resources.
So there is, I really appreciate you sharing that story, and there's a ton about what you said that I think is relevant. But I want to tie a couple of things, or not, and I want to tie a couple of things together. Cliff mentioned earlier the need to be proactive, and then I'm going to play devil's advocate and keep it with you, Damar, in a second before Cliff jumps in as well. Nick Adams and Josh Mueller mentioned a couple things in the chat that I think creates an obstacle. We want to be proactive, but the broader perception out there in the world of work is that HR isn't your friend, and you shouldn't be reaching out to HR about any of these things. And what I especially liked about what the story that you just told, or the experience that you just shared, was how you were deliberate, how you were vulnerable, you're creating the space for trust. How do you do that in a scalable way across an organization where the perception is, hey, it's the employee and the employer. HR isn't your friend. They're going to be supporting the company. What's your advice to those practitioners out there that are trying to overcome that hurdle, which exists? And it's actually popped up in the chat a couple of times. So I'd be curious to get your take on it.
Well, I think it comes from authenticity. You as a person, as an HR leader, your function, right, is people. You're in the organization to take care of the people. And I'm a firm believer, and there could be others that disagree with my philosophy, but if I take care of the employees, they're going to take care of everything else. I have to take care of the employee first. It's not the shareholder first. It's not the customer first. Your most important asset at any business is its people. And that involves retention efforts. It recalls, fair pay. You got to know all the policies, procedures, processes, but you have to be someone that can stand flat-footed, look people in the eye, and tell them, I'm here with you. I'm going to support you. Doesn't mean I'm not going to hold you accountable when you need disciplinary actions, etc. We're not going to be that type of an organization, but I'm going to put your needs and your things first. And then you establish the trust. And you do that through listening sessions, having small breakdown sessions where you can hear honest feedback from the employees, and not run and tell the first leader that you get to about confidential conversations. So it starts with the leader first. And once that trust is established, keep it. Make sure that your word is your bond. If you commit to doing something for the employees, then keep your word. You can't always make a business first decision. You have to look at the long haul, the long picture, the long game, and understand that. And so, all companies where I have worked, they know who I am before I get to the door. And I'm going to tell you, I am a people first type of person. That's the first thing that's on my board at my office is people first. And I reinforce that with my team, and I hold them to a standard of ethics and a standard of conduct that helps to reinforce that we are going to be a people first organization. And so, you, as the individual HR leader speaking directly to you guys, you have to figure out whose side you're on. And it
Great.
has to go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that's great stuff. People first. Love a ton of that. I mean, we could break these out into standalone conversations, but I want to make sure Cliff has an opportunity to respond too when we're looking at the issues of being proactive, building trust, and the perception, and reconciling that with the perception of what exists in the broader workforce that HR isn't your friend. What are some of the things that can be done to overcome that hurdle?
Well, I think part of it is, perception is certainly reality for a lot of people. I think part of the issue is if we look at what the function of HR, what it has been for the decades that we've called it human resources, what are we, about 30, 40 years now that we've actually called that function human resources. I don't particularly like that term, right? Because I think it dehumanizes these professionals that are actually, like Damar is saying, really trying to help individuals. But if we go back to how it started as a human resources function, it really had two roles: to reward or to punish. And then human resources was tasked with building processes around those two things. I'm either going to reward you or I'm going to punish you. And so people became conditioned over decades to expect that from HR. So I think it's a very valid point that folks are bringing up in the chat, and that you're bringing up, Dr. Jim, certainly Damar's commenting on. This is a very real thing. How do you change that? Well, one of the ways that you change it is by broadcasting what your purpose as an organization is. And it's the reason that a lot of organizations are moving away from CHRO as a title, and making it Chief People Officer, for example, right? Or something people in wellness, right? At the C-suite level, because that really defines the purpose of the organization. But you can be more specific to say the purpose of this HR organization, if you're not going to change it from HR, is to do X, right? Is to be X for you. And I like what Damar is saying is when you get a good leader like Damar that says, I am going to represent you as the person in this organization and do my very best for you so you can do your best in the role that you've been hired to do. Like that really is, it's not a marketing saying that we put on a wall, right? That is a broadcasted purpose to his organization that says, I'm here for you and I'm going to advocate for you, right? That's extremely important, because otherwise you're left with the binary perception of reward or punish. So you need to broadcast your purpose and be very clear in what you're advocating for.
And Dr. Jim, just briefly, one of the things that I've done as the head of people in other organizations, well, in all of them, is rebrand the name, right? So you won't find me leading a human resources department. It's either global people services or people operations, because I want that old moniker, that ball and chain that's been lingering, to be severed so that they know it is a new day. There is a new philosophy that is embracing people first agendas and making sure that doesn't mean that I'm anti-organization. No, I have the whole organization from the CEO that I'm responsible for to the last person hired. So I embrace all of that. But we're going to do it smart, we're going to do it strategically, and we're doing it putting people first.
So there's a couple of things that I want to call out that both Cliff and Damar you just said, and it's under the umbrella of naming things in a way to get a response. And what caught my attention about it, Cliff, you brought out the point about human resources being called human resources, and then Damar, you described it in terms of ball and chain. And it brings me back to a conversation that I had with John Graham, who is the author of Plantation Theory. He was on the show several weeks back. And one of the things that he mentioned is that HR as a function, in terms of how they name things, is not exactly inclusive. And when you think about the concept of talent acquisition, what are the roots of
Did we lose Jim?
I think I think he's frozen. Hey, Jim.
Yeah, I'm sorry. The video, we had a stream issue with StreamYard. So when you look at the roots of these words and the connotations that they give, it sets a bad precedent in terms of accomplishing the things that we want to accomplish, in terms of building trust, in terms of building vulnerability, those sort of things. It automatically creates a barrier to that. So I appreciate both of you calling that out. So we've kind of talked through what the problem is, a little bit about why the problem exists. Let's work on talking through how do we actually solve this problem. I think we're at a spot where, both of you in this conversation have demonstrated or modeled a way that you solve it, but let's build a template for that. And I want to bring that to Cliff. We know that there are certain things that leaders are currently doing that are contributing to these problems where there's a separation between the business and the people. There's an automatic roadblock that's built that prevents people from having these conversations openly. So let's fix that. When you're thinking about the role of a leader in advancing these conversations and creating more of these mental health conversations in an open and transparent way within the workplace, what are the things that you would suggest that leaders need to do to better facilitate those conversations, better encourage their people to have those conversations?
Yeah, so I'll go back to something I said earlier, and I think it bears repeating. Leaders first need to be participants in the programs that they're advocating for. And that doesn't even need to be if they don't have a similar problem. And often when I speak at AA meetings, for example, I'll bring friends or family. I've brought some of my workmates, not because they have an issue, but because I want them to understand the world that I'm coming from, right? The world that I grew up with. And so it goes back to sort of what Damar was saying about how do you build empathy? You build empathy by practice, right? And immersing yourself into a program that you would like to maybe broadcast to your employee population, you need to first participate in it. You don't need to share the ailment that the individuals might have, but it gives you a different lens. You learn something. And I've never taken someone to an AA meeting where they didn't come out and say, I expected X and I got X, Y, Z, A, B, C, and go on. Like, it is such an eye-opening experience, especially for those that don't suffer from, in this case, alcoholism. But if a leader wants to bring a program into their ecosystem because they truly want to help, they need to first participate. And that would be my recommendation, because you're going to get a lot out of that. You're going to learn a lot about your employee base just by participating, let alone maybe you do suffer from something similar. And maybe that becomes a gateway for what we're trying to do, honestly, Dr. Jim, we're just trying to make space for conversation. And the only way that we can do that is by educating ourselves at every level, leaders, non-leaders, whomever it might be. And what we're doing today is part of that. But a leader, I think, in my view, in my experience, a leader has the responsibility to educate themselves.
So I really like a couple of the things that you just called out. One is leaders that absolutely need to participate in these initiatives to model the way forward. You mentioned another component when it comes to leaders need to be educated about what and how to have these conversations. Damar, what would you add to that, or any? What else would you add to that? And what's your response to anything that's already been said?
Yeah, I think those are excellent examples that Cliff has shared. I think, first of all, in its simplest format, be approachable. Someone, no one is going to talk to somebody they don't trust or they don't think likes them, right? So the first thing is to lower that title and remove that out of the picture and be approachable. I think two, people also need the safe spaces. So one-on-ones could be an amazing opportunity to build rapport and relationships with your subordinates. So I would suggest having those on a regular, recurring basis, because the first thing that's probably going to show up is a change in the performance of the employee when there's something that's going on in their personal life. They may not want to talk about it. Their moods may change. There's going to be some level of, wow, something's not right with Damar. Let me try to figure this out, right? So one-on-ones with your direct reports would be excellent ways to just have conversations and not just focus on the one, two, three things that are your goals, but how are you doing? That very simple question of how are you doing? And then pause for a response and actually listen to the employee. They'll share when they're ready to, but giving them that safe space to be able to do so, I think is critical. And then personalize your own journey, right? I think, we miss out on a lot of opportunities to mentor others, but people want to be mentored by people that they can relate to. And so if you share some of the things that you're going through, I'm not trying to get into your personal history, but personalize some of your journey so that they know that they are not alone, that they can relate to you. I think those are some few examples as to how to help to make this a reality for folks. And we have to eliminate the us versus them, that I'm at this level and you're at this level, so there's no way that we can relate. Well, that's just false. We're all people.
What's funny that Damar, you say that. I just add a quick note. There's an interesting sort of proverb, if you will. A healthy person wants 10,000 things. A sick person wants one.
Mm.
So you think about that, and it puts things in perspective. When we're ill, we just want to be well. That's all we really want. And there's a lot of people in our organizations who just want to be well. Right. And I think we owe it to give them that opportunity, because I think you give them the opportunity and watch what happens. Right. It's pretty amazing. Damar, I know that you've seen it. I've seen it personally. People blossom and it might take some time, but that investment in that human being is well worth it.
And Dr. Jim, I don't think we've spent enough time talking about remote versus those employees that are close to you. So you can see a lot from those people that you see. It's more difficult to see someone who doesn't work in front of you all the time and what they're going through. And so you have to be very specific in the outreach to ensure that people are feeling like they are a part. So be intentional about how you're bringing up situations for them to be included in. The invite to the Christmas party, for example, make sure it goes to the remote employees and that they have an opportunity to come in and to participate, because it goes back to the very first thing you said, Cliff, which is connectivity, being connected. People want to feel that connection, because that is where we get our strength from, is from others. And so that's critically important as well.
So a lot of great stuff from both of you in just this piece of the conversation, but the overall conversations had a lot of insight, and I want to follow up on the approachability track that we're on right now, and tie it back to something that you mentioned earlier, Cliff, which is, hey, you may not want to, and I might be misparaphrasing, so there's a Roger Clemens word there, but the point that you made, I think, at some point was you don't necessarily have to share everything about yourself to create that space. But I would almost argue that you as a leader probably should be erring on the side of oversharing versus undersharing to create that feeling within your employees that it's okay for them to open up. So that's just a theory on my part, but I want each of you to kind of respond to, sort of where that balance sit. As a leader, if you want to create approachability, if you want to create the space for those sort of conversations, should you err on the side of oversharing versus undersharing when you're trying to advance these conversations? Cliff, to you first.
Yeah. So I think I'm going to throw out a challenge, maybe sort of a theoretical challenge to say, is it really balance or is it priority? I look at it as a priority when I have these conversations, especially with the charity that my wife and I run, which is called Kyle's Wish, and it's named after my son, who is right there on the piano, my son Kyle, who passed away. And you can find more about that on kyleswish.com if you're interested. We have a lot of services available to the mental health community. But when we're having these conversations, I'm trying to understand what my priority is. And does it, because not every conversation requires me to go 10 layers deep. Sometimes it's one or two, because my priority is just to help the individual that I'm speaking with know that I may not share their exact experience, but I've had a similar experience. And by sharing enough of that experience, just sometimes by saying, for me, that I suffered from alcoholism and depression, and I was, believe it or not, I was extraordinarily introverted, because of it. And so that might be enough to get the person to go, okay, that's similar enough to me. Others, I might need to go deep. If I'm really trying to get through to, I was, speaking to a group of young people in a sober living facility last week, the one actually that my son used to go to. I go back there every couple of months and speak. And I had someone come up to me afterwards and said, and I'm telling this long and deep story. I spoke for an hour, right? Unbelievable that I could speak for an hour, I know. And this young person came up to me afterwards and said, I actually knew your son, 3 years ago. I knew him before he passed away, and I didn't expect to see you here. But now hearing your story, the depth of that story, the depth of Kyle's story, maybe it's time that I'm not here anymore. Meaning maybe it's time I get my act together, maybe get out of this sober living situation and start to take this a little bit more seriously for my own mental health. So I think it's situational. I think and you do that on priority. I don't think there's a good balance rule there. I think achieving balance is an endless struggle. I think people do that all the time. Work-life balance, I think, is not something I would recommend trying to achieve, because you'll never do it. And you're only going to disappoint both sides, and then you're disappointed. But prioritizing, some days my family's a priority. Some days my work is a priority. Every day my mental health is a priority. So if we think about it that way in terms of priority, I think it might help leaders understand how to position those conversations.
Yeah, and I would just say, to add to that, just be real. I don't think it's a matter of over or under sharing your own story, because everybody's not comfortable being as transparent and open. And so you have to create the space for yourself to, one, want to be a support to someone else, but two, if you're not in a good place yourself, then passing them to someone else that can help them, I think, is just as important as spending the time trying to listen. And so I would say, it's just be real. Regardless of your situation, two people can go through the exact same thing and have two different responses for it. And so it's not necessarily about being the same, but being able to relate to the experience that they have. I think most of us are probably good judge of character and good judges of people. And so you'll know in that conversation, if you open yourself up to listen, to hear what the other person is saying, which story out of your past or your experience that will help them to gravitate towards what you're saying and build that trust. And it may not happen in one setting. This is a process. And so conversation after conversation, hopefully you're leading to the right result. But just be real is what I would sum it up as.
I want to thank both you, Damar, and Cliff for joining us on the show today and advancing this really important conversation. Before we start the process of closing down the show, Damar, I want to keep it with you. please share with the audience where people can find you, how best they can reach out to you, because I'm sure whether they're at Hyliion or not, you should be somebody that is in their network. So go ahead and share with the class where the best way for people to find you.
Absolutely. My contact information is on LinkedIn as well. So if you've joined here, several people I've invited personally, just connect with me on LinkedIn. But damar.phillips@Hyliion, and that's HYLIION.com, is a great way to connect with me. Or my personal email address is damarphillips5, the number 5, @gmail.com is another way to do that as well. And my pleasure to participate with such esteemed group. Dr. Jim, I respect all the work that you've done and that we've partnered on. And Cliff, just to meet you a few weeks ago and to hear your story, I'm permanently changed as a result of that. So thank you for your vulnerability and sharing the insights that you have today and then when we met originally.
Awesome stuff, Damar. Cliff, same question to you. Again, appreciate you hopping on and sharing your story. Where can people find you?
Sure. And first of all, I'll back at you, Damar. Like very, very inspiring. We had a lot of folks know we prepped before, obviously this this call today. And Damar is just a really inspiring leader. If you're a leader that wants to know how to do it, you should be reaching out to Damar because he's doing it every day. And we need more Damars in this world. But folks can find me two ways. I'm easy to get. I'm literally the only person at Phenom that has a single name email. It's just Cliff, CLIFF at phenompeople.com. In my personal life, again, the charity that my wife and I run is called Kyle's Wish Foundation. And I can be found, again, pretty easily at cliff@kyleswish.com. Of course, can be found on LinkedIn. So reach out to me. I'm happy to participate. I do a lot of speaking on this subject. So if you're looking for some help and insight and experience, I would love to be able to share my story.
I can't thank both of you enough for being on the show. Appreciate your insights and also the roadmap that you paved for leaders to be more vulnerable and also advance these mental health conversations in the workplace. If we're looking at key themes to pull away, if leaders want to be more effective in this space, you have to lead from the front. You have to participate. You have to demonstrate vulnerability. You have to demonstrate a true connection with your people. And that seems fine from a general theory perspective, but you have to drill it down into a practical execution. And some of the ways that came out really hold your one-on-one sacred as part of that effort. And there's a ton more that you could be doing, but I think if we distill down this entire conversation into one key point is if you want to advance this initiative, you can't be a passive participant. You can't be a bystander. You need to be active and you need to lead from the front and model the behavior that's required. And I appreciate both of you calling that out loud as part of this discussion. So I want to thank everybody that attended the conversation, everybody that chimed in on the chat. It was a phenomenal discussion and I appreciate how everybody advanced the conversation. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, we will be having live panels every Wednesday and Friday at 12:30 Central. Make sure you follow the Talent Strategy 60 page. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm everywhere, but you can also find me on TikTok and YouTube and everywhere else too. Certainly look at Circa. So if there are diversity initiatives that you want to drive, definitely reach out and connect with me and we can work through how you can advance a more diverse environment. But we totally appreciate the time that you've taken out of your day to advance this conversation, to listen to this conversation and drive this conversation forward. Looking forward to more great conversations down the road where we are helping talent strategy leaders and professionals do more with less by leveraging collective intelligence. Thank you for joining Talent Strategy 60, and we will catch you next time.